Hi fellow investors, Joe here. I am finally getting around to making what I hope is a series of videos on technical analysis, investing tutorials. I'd like to do a handful of beginning technical analysis, intermediate and advanced, and cover all kinds of things: trend lines, moving averages, chart patterns, buy signals, sell signals, entry points, exit points, looking at volume, etc. So let's get started. And this is a new channel. I don't have many subscribers yet, so if you learned something, I really would appreciate it if you would consider subscribing or at least giving it a like. Alright, so let's talk about trend lines and trend channels. The old saying goes, the trend is your friend until it ends. And that's one of the key fundamentals of investing. You try to identify a trend as soon as possible, and you let the train go by you and grab onto the last car, and you hold on until it stops, right? Yeah, and before I go any farther, just a reminder that this is not investment advice. This is just for education. And for entertainment purposes, you need to make your own investment decisions. So, what constitutes a trend channel? You need to see 3 or more touches on each trend line, the upper trend line and the lower trend line. And I'll show you that in a minute. I have 4 or 5 different charts that I'm going to show you just as soon as I finish rolling through these slides. So in a fundamentally strong stock, you can use the trend lines, a trend channel, to time your buys. This is more sophisticated and more effective than dollar cost averaging, and it's much less risky than buying all at once. What we want to see, what we want to look for, are 45-degree trend channels. A steeper channel, while enticing, is almost always unsustainable. I'll show you an example of that. When it breaks out of the channel to the upside, then you pause and watch. Often, paradoxically, that breakout to the upside is signaling the end of the trend, or at least a temporary end of the trend. I'll show you that on the chart. And when it breaks the lower trend line, then you want to start decreasing your position, not all at once, but in steps, in pieces. Here's the final thought: the longest trends are the best trends. So let's get out the charts now and see what I'm talking about. Okay, so here's the first chart. This is a company you're probably familiar with. Dick's Sporting Goods had a great run in 2021, and it is showing really a typical, borderline perfect 45-degree trend line, which you can see right along here, trend channel, sorry. And as is often the case, the bottom of the trend channel is being formed by the 50-day exponential moving average. So you want to find some charting software and make sure you have the 50-day exponential moving average on it. The reason that it finds support there is because retail investors and the big fund managers are all watching that line. We'll do a different video on moving averages. So if we draw our trend line, basically we've got one along here, and we've got one along here. Now this is an art, not a science. So you're going to have some imperfections and some very slight movements out of the channel. But there you see a really good channel. Let's make it darker actually. And it's about 45 degrees. And it lasted a good, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a solid 6 months, right? So when you identify the channel, then in general, and you know it's a fundamentally sound company like Dick's Sporting Goods, then what you can do is you can accumulate when it gets near the bottom of the trend channel, and then you just ride it out. That's the most basic strategy. Now, if you want to get tricky, you can try to swing trade, right? Buy at the bottom of the channel, sell at the top, And this takes a lot of management. Obviously it can work. It's a lot harder than it looks. It's easier in hindsight to see where you should have bought and sold. In real time, it's tricky. Now, a couple things. You don't want to sell until it closes beneath the trend line. These are intraday moves beneath the trend line, as well as this one. So when you see a close beneath the trend line, then you start unloading, and you do it a piece at a time. Maybe you sell it 4 pieces over 4 days, because many times it'll just dip beneath the trend line for a day or two and pull right back in. Conversely, when you see it break the trend line to the upside, although that's nice for your bank account, that's not a time to get excited, because often that signals the end of the trend, at least temporarily. So when it breaks the trend line, like right here and here, then you just wait. You don't add more, and you just wait. And a lot of times it'll pull back into the trend channel, as you see here. But sometimes it will mark the end of the trend. And here we had this big gap out on earnings. And sure enough, that was the end of the trend. And now it's forming a base, right? Looks like it's forming a cup. Although the handle is drooping as the overall market pulls it down. All right, that's Dick's Sporting Goods. Let me show you another great example here. This is Boot Barn. It also had a fantastic 2021. It's a Western wear store, mostly boots, I think. I've never been to one, actually. And this, again, is a beautiful 45-degree trend channel that you could have ridden along with for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like 9 months. And you draw the trend as soon as you see it, and you line it up as best you can, and it's not going to be perfect. This is an art. And there's your bottom trend line. Same thing. And it's not, you don't want to see a broadening channel like that. But it's not. It's quite even. And again, you could accumulate by buying near the bottom of the trends. You could, by the bottom trend line, you could lighten up as it gets near the top. When it breaks the upper trend line, you wait and watch. So here, technically, it had only touched the bottom trend line. It's just a judgment call. You could have conceivably sold off a piece here when it closed beneath that bottom trend line. But none of these things are perfect, right? Like ideally you would want to have seen an oscillation where this would come down and touch the trend line again, and it didn't. But yeah, like I said, it's not a science. And so here we see in November it has broken out of the trend line. Personally, like I said, this in my mind is a time to wait and watch, not to buy more. And then when we see it pull back into the trend line or form a new base and break out of that base, then that's a time to buy more. So let me show you a trend line that's too steep. This is Danaher. They make medical equipment. It should do well with the new COVID, rise in the COVID variant right now. We can see it broke out a little bit today in this double bottom. But what I want to look at right now is this is a trend channel for sure, right? But it's following the 8-day exponential moving average. It's very steep and it's very tight. And certainly it worked until it didn't, right? But it only lasted about 3 months. Trend channels that are that steep, either to the upside or the downside, usually don't last too long. If you want to try to be nimble, you could jump in and jump out. But it's really hard. So when it broke the lower trend line, then this was your time to start unloading. And now, as we can see, it's making this nice double bottom. When it breaks out of this double bottom base up here at 330, then you could consider getting back in, right? The best trend lines of all, and this is my last slide, I'll try to keep this under 11 minutes, the best trend lines, the longer the trend line, the better. Here you see Microsoft, one of the best investments of all time. This is a 10-year chart. And look at this trend line. Let's put it in here. Oh. So maybe we do something like that. And you had a trend here. You had another trend here. Now it's tightening up again. And again, you just use these trend lines to guide your investment. You know, everybody uses Microsoft. You know it's making money hand over fist. So what you can do is safely accumulate it as it comes near the bottom of the trend line. When it breaks the trend line, you wait and watch. Here it made a base, broke out of the base, and then it formed a new uptrend. And then you can jump into this one. You know, maybe you do something like this, etc. I think you get the point, right? So, in conclusion, trend lines and trend channels are one tool we can use to predict price movement, and when we find a trend, we hold on to it till it ends. All right, if you have any comments regarding trend channels or trend lines, whether you use them in your own investing, let me know. I hope you found this video helpful. Have a great weekend.